Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is your host, Shelly Ann Edwards Barron, here to talk things, reports, narratives, and comprehension so that you could feel a little less stressed heading into SEA 2025. And I bumped my camera just before I started, so yeah, I think that could work. Yep, so we're good to go. Um, Thank you so much for joining me. And for those of you who, let's say, this is your first episode, thank you so much for taking the time, taking the chance, and checking out what the series is all about. And let me give you a little bit about myself. So, I am a creative writing specialist, which means that I look at creative writing from multiple different perspectives, using actually something called the oh, why is it slipping me right now? Multisensory learning. That's it. Just the term just slipped me just like that. So when I look at creative writing, I look at it from the reader's perspective, from the writer's perspective, from the marker's perspective, because they're all slightly different. And for students to really master their reports and narratives, they have to understand just a little bit about each of these things. And so to help them, I use the multisensory learning. So we do games and experiments and activities so that we can take all the intangible stuff and make it actually tangible so that the students could, kind of wrap their minds around it. And it's the same with the comprehension. We do some activities there too. And I'm doing writing and comprehension because they're kind of like two sides of the same thing. And so there are actually really clear strategies that students can use to improve their comprehension. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me give you the idea of the breakdown of today's session. We'll be covering incident reports, ending stories, and responding to poetry. All right. And so for those of you who are here live, thank you so much. It's just so awesome not feeling like if I'm talking to the screen alone, but there are actual people on the other side live with me. Feel free to ask questions. You could, put comments in the chat and so on. Um, chat in the comments, whichever way you want to look at it. So that if you have any specific questions dealing with anything that I've asked, I'm sharing about, go ahead and you can communicate like that. If you have questions like you're looking at the replay, and if you are looking at the recording, thank you again for your time. And you have a question, but it's not live, type it in the comments. I do check back from time to time. I get a pop up, somebody commented and so on. Or you could WhatsApp me if you want to speak directly with me. That's not a problem as well. My number is going to be on the screen in a little bit. In fact, let me put it over. So there's my number, 717-4993. But let me say it again a little more slowly, just in case you wanted to reach out. 717-4993. All right, so let's get started with some reminders. Remember, I'm doing these reminders because I tell you, I literally learn something every day. And every class that I have with my students, I make it a point of, looking at what was done well, how the students responded, so that I could continually improve and meet the direct needs of students. And so for this week, these are the things that kind of came up for me. There is always a way, even if it sometimes takes a bit longer. And I have a few students who are um what we would call well, what do they call them? Special students who need special education. Special education needs, I think, yeah, that's what it's referred to these days. But in any case, these students, they are you have different levels of challenges. So it's not just that they're learning these things, but they're also learning these things in terms of writing and comprehension. They're learning them with some challenges. So they may have difficulty piecing things together, recognizing emotions. Remembering things, lots of different challenges. And so One thing that I know sometimes I had an experience, this happened a little while before, but I was reminded of it during this week gone here, that, sometimes as teachers, we want to rush ahead and we want to have, we know our lesson and the lesson was so carefully crafted and it's an awesome lesson and the student seemed to enjoy the lesson. But then when we do the reviews, we don't get the feedback that we would like to get. And so sometimes what works well for us may not work exactly as well for the student, even if they enjoyed it. Because remember, we want the lesson to be enjoyable as well as memorable, and we want them to put things into practice. So we're not just looking for an enjoyable lesson, we're also looking for a practical, transformative lesson that would translate into the student doing things differently and better and enhancing their writing or their comprehension. And so that is always something at the top of my mind because, of course, I use the multisensory learning, and sometimes students can get caught up in the activity itself and they're not able to make the connection. And so that is definitely something with multisensory learning. Always make the connection for the student. Don't leave it up to them to figure it out because remember, we're teaching, we're sharing, we're guiding. And so we need to guide and therefore we need to make the connection for the student and not just have them leave it up to them because it's obvious. Well, no, it's not obvious. Remember, these students are now learning these things, and what makes sense for us as an adult, even when we try to look at it from the perspective of a student, we're not going to quite get it. So we do have to always make those connections for the students. So that was a kind of like doubling up here, but that's kind of what came to me this week as I was working with the students. The second thing is that emotions and emotional reactions seem to be a real challenge for students to express. Now, I do have students who have challenges with these things, but even average students, regular students, those who we would call neurotypical students, sometimes have difficulty expressing emotions. And that's a product of our society. I mean, we talk a lot about expressing yourself, but then we have all these rules and guidelines and so on. And so, quite early on, students learn to, be quiet and stay in their corner. That's what we kind of teach them to. And so, when it comes to emotions, many people don't understand how to really effectively express their emotions. And so, what I realized is that emotions are pretty unique to humans. I mean, we ascribe emotional reactions to lots of animals and so on, but quite often those are we are projecting on the animals. And so we really have to think about how to express these emotions from our uniquely human perspective. And the thing is, emotions and emotional responses are so intricately entwined in storytelling that if we don't do that well, we're going to be missing out on something. And as I'm saying that, I remember that I had I have a worksheet for emotions, and I think I took it out of today's slides. So I'm going to put it back because if your child is having challenges kind of like figuring out how to add in emotions to stories and so on, then these worksheets would really, really be helpful because I've found that, I mean, usually I'll tell you, okay, let me give you exactly, right? And I'm going to pause on the slides just a little bit while I do this because I'm adding back the slide as we speak. Um, in this last week gone, I had one-on-one sessions with my students, and these are the writing students, right? Standard 5 writing students. And with these one-on-one sessions, out of the 10 students that I've met so far, out of those students, I would say 8 of them had some difficulty with expressing the emotions. Some of them didn't have emotional reactions throughout the story at all. Some of them, when they did have the emotional reactions, it was just kind of stated and not described as it should have been. And so this is something that's ongoing because, of course, the teachers at school are telling them to add in the reactions. I have been telling them to add in the reactions. And so now that we've met, because these are the group students, right? So I always do one on ones with the group students as well. This time we looked at narratives. The next time we do one on ones, which will be in about 3 weeks, we're going to do reports, look at reports. Um, but every student had some kind of challenge, and 8 of them I would average where it was to the point where I had to make mention specifically, this is one of the things that you need to work on. So integrating emotions into stories is definitely something that, if you haven't been looking at it, then definitely pay attention to it, because if you've been following the series, you'd realize that I spoke about the in the rising action. In order to get effective rising action, the student needs to show the emotional reaction of the main character, especially. So, how do we know the situation is more intense? Because the feelings of the main character shows more intensity. And so that is something that you want to pay attention to, because emotions and emotional reactions really make a difference in showing the rising action, showing the characters' responses, and all of that makes a difference. So when I had that experience this week, I realized, yeah, I do need to put a little more emphasis on helping the students show the emotions. So I gave each of them some activities and some practice, and then the next time we do the narrative writing, I'll give them some reminders, and their focus is really on showing the character's response. So that's definitely something that pay attention to it if you haven't already started looking at that. And then finally, templates are useful. Of course, this follows along with what I've been saying about even the emotions. Get a worksheet, get something that directly targets the area that you're having challenges with. And so, in doing that, sometimes students need like a guide until they get it for themselves and they could internalize it and make it their own. We have to tell them what to do. Now, of course, that sounds kind of simple. It's not. There are some students, you tell them exactly what to do and they do the opposite. That is really because they want to express their creativity. Remember, we spoke about different students being different, and um, some students, there's a style of essay prompt that says include this line, or begin your paragraph, begin your story with this line. I think the way they put it is write a story that begins with this line, and they give you the line. I've had students who don't include the line because they're caught up in writing the story. I have students who modify the line because they didn't quite like the line the way it was, so they had to try to make it their own. And so we have some independent thinkers who will not respond directly to this, write it this way. In a case like that, what you would do is work with the student to create the template. So you're not creating your own template and telling them do this and they have to follow it. Work with the student to create the template. And then once you create the template, make it clear to them that this was mostly their idea. Mostly, you know how we do it as teachers, right? But at least they participated in the creation of the template. But use the template, because here's what's going to happen. During the exam, students are going to be rushed It doesn't matter how confident they go into the exam. It doesn't matter how many skills they have. The majority of students are going to feel rushed because this is the day. This is the exam. Everything else was preparation. And so they will feel some, some anxiety going into it. And if it is that they've been practicing with templates and, acronyms and different things, they would now then have a strategy and be able to calm themselves lot more quickly, and they would have that format for responding. So you really want students to practice with templates. So sometimes I give students who are like really, really struggling with hooks, I give them a template for a hook. And notice I said template, I'm not giving them word for word. I'm giving them a sentence where they could swap out different sections for their own ideas. Because even when you use a template, you don't want the student regurgitating words and ideas that you told them, or, they have these um, a list of sentences that they could use. I'll use this one for my hook today, or I'll use that one. That is not developing the student's writing. That is, yes, you're giving them a start, and maybe in the beginning you might do something like that, but you really want the student to move toward independent writing eventually. So you don't want them just regurgitating templates and ideas, but you start with the template, you start with giving them part of it so that they could generate their own ideas, and then eventually they would understand it, make it their own, and be as creative as they need to be within the context. So lots of, yeah, I always have these kinds of weeks because my mind is constantly and consistently looking at how can I reach the students better? What templates can I create? What worksheets can I create to help students with their writing? And so I've started documenting it. I had a business coach once who told me, I need to document these things because they're useful, but I never got around to it until now. But I'm looking back at some of these ideas and realizing that, yes, sometimes I need the reminder myself. So once I have it written down, I could, flip back and, refresh my own memory. So, all right, let's get into what you came here exactly for. We're looking at reports, narratives, and comprehension. So let's start with the reports. Now, this week, at this point in your SEA journey, we are roughly about midterm. We have done quite a lot since April because we started in April doing the whole exam thrust. And so students would be familiar. They would know what an incident report is. They would have definitions. They would have done some practice on lots of different things. So what do we do now? Now remember, I told you, I don't know if this is your first session, you'd probably be hearing this for the first time. If it's not, you probably heard this before. One of the things with the revision that we're doing on this exam thrust journey to SEA 2025 is that we go according to a cyclical motion. What that means is we start at one end, we go through a certain number of things, and then we loop back, and then we go through them again in a slightly different context, and then we loop back and we go through them in a slightly different context. So at this point, we would have gone through foundation ideas with report writing. We would have looked at incident reports in terms of our planning and different things. And now, this time around, we're going into a little bit more detail with the incident reports, and we're sort of combining the skills that we've looked at. And I know at school, teachers kind of look at things as a whole, but what I've found is that when you look at it in bits and pieces first, you sort of take it apart. Then when you start to put it back together, students need a little refresher on how to put it together. And then come January, we're going to do this again reviewing, and so we're constantly going forward, review, forward, review, forward, review. And that is how you get the reinforcement and get students to really understand and, internalize the lessons that we're teaching. So when we take this closer look at incident reports this time around, we really have to pay attention to these three things. Now, this week I was privileged to get some insight into the grading of the SEA reports. This was from this year. And I noticed a couple things which really reinforced what I've been saying all along, but it also showed me a couple other things. And what I realized is that, I mean, I talk about step by step details all the time. And what I noticed in the information that I got was that the step by step, not only is it critically important to have that step by step, but we need the effective transitions to connect each of these steps. So it's really a combination of things, as we understand. This is, we're grading with the examiners are grading with this holistic grading tool, so that they're not necessarily looking at individual sections as we would look at content and language and organization and so on. We do that now, but from January, if teachers aren't switching to holistic, if they're not already there, you as a parent definitely need to start looking at things in a more holistic way. If you're not too clear on what I'm talking about, send me a message. You can comment on the live. I can get you a copy of the holistic review grading scheme, as well as the what you call it, the CLOG, which is content, language, organization, grammar. If you're not familiar with what any of those things mean, send me a message and I'll clarify as best as possible. But the idea is that we want details. So we can't have, students writing about general things, and then there was a fight or a fight ensued. It doesn't matter how formal you say it. If you only say a fight ensued and then somebody intervened to try to stop the fight, what did that fight look like? Who did what? And how did things unfold step by step? It is critical, especially with incident reports. Because with an incident report, remember you're looking at who's responsible, who would need to be punished, etc., etc. That's the end goal of everything in an incident report. So, um, what is actually going on step by step? We want details. Details are very important, and just as important as details are the transitions which students use to connect the ideas. Now, I did an entire episode on transitions, um, and so you can check back that. But definitely, you want to use both transition words and transition phrases. And so I know a lot of teachers focus on transition words and phrases, but you want to really make sure there's a kind of balance. I've seen some students consistently only using transition words like then and next and first and second. Those kinds of transitions are for like standard three. First, next, then. That's when students are learning sequencing. At this point in Standard 5, the use of transitions and connecting ideas should be far more sophisticated than that. And so you want to hear phrases like prior to and additionally and, you know, further to what happened, those kinds of expressions, because you really want that higher level transition in the report. And you see, when you use the higher level transitions, you know what happens? The sentence itself that has a transition has to be constructed in a certain way and it shows a more advanced approach to sentence construction. And that is why you want the transition phrase and transition word, not one or the other. And so that, I think, makes the writing a lot more rich. Of course, you want to work on the vocabulary, excuse me, but you don't want the vocabulary words to be so fantastical that the examiner has to go to a dictionary to look it up. Even if it's used effectively, um, you just be careful that it's within range because, again, remember, while the student might have a really extensive vocabulary, this is an exam and we're aiming for towards certain things, right? And so we want the details, we want the transitions, words and phrases, and we want the vocabulary. So, words like informed and transpired, and, of course, the transitions like, further to this and following that activity and those kinds of things. Those transition words and phrases really do elevate as well. So I know most people focus on the vocabulary quite a lot, but I want to emphasize how the step by step details are important and the use of transitions, both words and phrases. And so, what are you doing this week to help you reinforce this with your child or your students? So, first off, you want to review transition words and phrases. And we're looking at this specifically within the context of incident reports because we're focusing on incident reports this week. And of course, there are transition words and phrases that can be used throughout all of them, but consider all the different types of reports. When I say them, that's what I mean. But because we're doing type by type, what you will eventually be getting is having the student become more familiar with the use of transition words and phrases within particular contexts. So, yes, they would know the transition words and phrases. I use this in reports, etc. But then when they think and they focus on like an incident report, what words and transitions come to mind? And so you really want to kind of pay attention to that. And then we want to review formal vocabulary for incidents. So, what words can be used, let's say, in a vehicular collision? What words will be used to describe an altercation? What words would be used to look at vandalism, for example? And so, get working on vocabulary and enhancing the vocabulary to really make the language feel more formal as you write. And then, of course, after doing the reviews, and remember, for those of you who are new, if this is for your first session, what I advocate is 3 touches with their writing each week. So for reports, we want to touch reports 3 times for the week. First 2 sessions, about 30 minutes each, average like 20 to 30 minutes, nothing extensive. But then the third session, you want to put aside about an hour so that the child could write a complete report. And this is outside of what's happening at school. I know there's a lot happening at school for some students, lots and lots of homework. It's like up to level, but through all of that, once there is a manageable enough schedule, you should be able to carve out like 1 hour for this for the week. And then for the narratives, you'll do the same. So you're looking at 2 hours, um, not on the same day, but 2 hours just to write the report and nothing else. So we're not doing a review and then writing. When we get to the point of writing the report, that's all we're doing. So here's your prompt. Well, your list of prompts, choose one, write it, the hours, then you're done. Okay, you can go play. And then you, as the parent, would do the review. So we don't want to prolong the issue and make it feel too tedious. That's why it's separated, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and then the hour just to write, and we have that. And that works out for lots of different reasons. In addition to not making it tedious, what you're also doing is getting the student to the point where they sit and write based on prompts and not always having teachers remind them. Because when they get to the exam, that's what's going to happen. They're not going to sit through a 20-minute lecture on report writing and then write. They're going to sit in the exam, flip the page, and just write. So you want to get them into that habit as well. Because even at school, when they do it, sometimes teachers will say, okay, this is a reminder, this is what we're working on, and so on. There's some chatting here and there, but you want to get them into that habit of just flipping the paper, getting the prompts, responding. So there are a few reasons why this kind of format is going to be pretty useful in the development of what you're doing. And of course, the resources, if you haven't gotten any of these yet from me, you can get the 5 reports challenge. You get sample reports in this one, plus a few prompts. In the report planning worksheets, you get 25 worksheets, plus that means 25 prompts, and get some other notes in that as well. And then you can use even these prompts to have students write about them as well. Right? So if you're looking for resources and you don't already have, then these are some options that you want to work with. So you can WhatsApp me 7174993 if you want to get any of these. Okay, let's move on to story endings. Now, stories are kind of, I don't want to say near and dear to me, but I have a certain, um, I guess you can call it a pain point when it comes to stories, because I see students struggling a lot with getting things together when it comes to stories. And so that's why definitely, I take it bit by bit. Get the students to understand the plot first, and then after they have the plot and they know that like the back of their hand, then we start to, plug in the descriptions, and we're plugging in two kinds of descriptions: character descriptions, setting descriptions. And so, um, climax, I mean, if you took in last week's episode where I kind of went through in detail the issues I have with climax and how it's generally taught. You'd understand what I mean. But of course, go back to that episode. So that's episode 23. Go back to that episode and review that if this is your first episode or you missed last week. But coming down to the ending of the story, a lot of students kind of, things sort of fall apart. So they get the introductions, they get the rising action, and then when they get to the ending of the story, they're like, how do I end this? So these are, I'm going to give you some ideas to help students with ending it. So, first off, what's in an ending? Now, of course, an ending is a kind of conclusion to the whole matter, right? And we want to get a reaction to the fact that the situation has ended, and then we want a lesson learned. Now, the lesson learned is what makes it the kind of story that sort of loops back on itself. And this is one of the reasons why I always tell students, before you start writing, decide on your lesson, because it's going to be far easier to make that circular connection when you know the lesson from up front. And so I'll give you an example. If the lesson is that the child must, well, I'm thinking obey parents, or um pay attention to parents when they speak. So the parents say something and you ignore them, right? So you want to have that lesson. In order to have that lesson and for it to really make sense and connect with readers, something has to happen in the beginning of the story where the parent spoke to the child and the child didn't listen. Now, that's the character. Yeah. If there's absolutely nothing like that in the beginning or nothing like that in the whole story, then the lesson is not going to make sense. And it's going to feel like if it's just tacked on because they I need a lesson, so let me put in one. I remember I have this list, and this that's a good enough lesson. You just add it in because you need to add in a lesson. Now, that's not going to be beneficial to the story. It'll be there, but it will not be integrated or connected effectively. And if, for the very least, you're not going to get any marks, and for the most, you might actually lose marks if that happens because it shows that the story isn't connected. And you're just adding in things rather than demonstrating how well you can connect ideas. And so, getting that lesson learned right at the beginning before you start writing allows you to create that circular concept of the story. And that circular concept is absolutely critical for micro short stories because it makes the story make sense. And so it's not just because SEA wants us to have a lesson learned. In fact, there's nowhere in the rubric that says you must have a lesson learned. But a lesson learned is very beneficial because it completes the story. And if you've noticed, I don't know if you have, but get a hold of the past papers and look at I'm just opening up my list here, and I'm going to just look at, no, 2024 was a report. So let's look at 2023. If we're looking at the 2023 prompts, we get in prompt number one, we want the events that followed and how the character reacted to the experience. Prompt number two, we want to know who was involved, what happened, and how the experience ended. Prompt number three, we also want to know the events that took place and how the experience ended. And so for SEA prompts, there is always that question of how the experience ended. And so we want to put that lesson learned to sort of make that completion. So this is how it ended, and this is what we kind of learned from that whole situation. And so that whole emphasis on how the experience ended gives us a challenge with the concept of the cliffhanger endings. Now, cliffhanger endings are pretty exciting, and I know lots of students want to learn about the cliffhanger ending. But for SEA, you really want to use a modified cliffhanger because a true cliffhanger ending leaves the audience wondering what happens next. Because the point is that the cliffhanger stops at the height of the situation, at the most intense point. But if your prompt says how the story ended or how the experience ended, and you have to write about how the experience ended, you can't actually use a cliffhanger because the cliffhanger does not give you an ending. And so that's one of the reasons why I say be very cautious with using cliffhangers. And in fact, even if you decide to use something like a cliffhanger, it wouldn't be like a true fledged cliffhanger ending because you're not going to stop at the intense moment. You're going to have to resolve that and then add something else that suggests that there's more to come. And so um, you really are going to be using a modified cliffhanger if it is that you want to use cliffhangers at all. So let's say the character is fighting off a creature, and you have to show the ending where they vanquish the creature disappears or they kill it or something. Then the modified cliffhanger after you end that. So you must end the scene and end the experience that you're describing. That has to end. And then after it ends, maybe you could write a sentence or two. So while the hero and the main characters and they're all celebrating, maybe you want to add a sentence that shows that the creature is starting to rejuvenate. So that means we know the creature is coming back. And then the hero is going to have to kill it again. What are they going to do the next time? So that's the kind of modification to the cliffhanger that you'd be able to do. But if you really look up the true cliffhanger endings and the origination of cliffhanger endings, they end in the midst of things. It's like, when we watch those series, and that's why I don't do series very well. I'm one of those binge watchers. After the season has ended, I'm gonna sit down and watch out the whole thing over a few days instead of waiting next week and next week and next week. Especially if it's action or something like that. If it's one of those, life stories where, you learn something new each time, I could do that weekly, but not those action. I prefer movies. When it's done, it's done. Even like those cliffhanger ending movies. I remember they into Across the Spider Verse. That's the second one. So we had Into the Spider Verse and then Across the Spider Verse. I didn't read the details and I did not realize that it was actually going to be a cliffhanger ending at the end of that movie. I don't handle cliffhanger endings as well. It's like we're in the midst of all the drama and we kind of have a direction, but then we have this whole new thing that comes up, and how is the hero going to deal with it? That is like a true cliffhanger. SEA stories don't work too well with that. Again, because it's flash fiction. Cliffhanger endings with flash fiction don't work as well as with longer stories when you know there's a sequel and you could go pick up the book or the other movie afterward. So that's the reason why I'm saying, really be careful with the cliffhanger endings. Um, so what are we doing this week then in order to really get the students to understand endings and how they can do endings? So you want to do some reading, definitely do some reading, find some short stories, or just go straight to the endings of stories that students have already, had the privilege of reading. And then kind of look at how the ending was described and explained and who was most active. So one of the things that I've seen happen quite often, a lot of students have the main character being a sort of recipient of the ending, the climax and the ending. So the main character just gets themselves into trouble and then somebody else comes and saves them. Now, to really have the climax and the ending as interesting as possible, you do want the main character to be a little bit more active than that. And so read different endings and see how things go. Um, if the child isn't too much into reading, you could probably look at them on television and ask them, what are the ideas you can get from different story endings. And then once you've done that, spend 20, 30 minutes doing that, one session, and then the next session. Remember, we're going 20 to 30 twice, and then a 1 hour session. And so in the second 20 to 30 minutes, you want to kind of practice endings. Just focus on the endings alone. So maybe you have stories and you kind of brainstorm the middle of the story and then practice the ending and see how the ending works. See if you can add a cliffhanger to it and how that works. Because you do want to practice this idea of adding in a cliffhanger if it is that's what the child wants to do. And then finally, once you've finished with everything and you've done that practice and done the reviews, then you get into writing a complete narrative. And this time your focus is on the ending. So you're writing the whole narrative, including the ending. But when you assess, you are specifically looking at how the story created that circular type of story. So they call it, I think, is like a circular ending or circular narrative or something along those lines. The technical term isn't the issue. What is the issue is that something that was mentioned in the introduction is dealt with in the conclusion. And usually it is a character flaw or a character issue in the introduction that is dealt with in the conclusion through the lesson learned. So in the introduction, the child, the main character, is shown to be um, selfish. In the conclusion, they learn not, being selfish isn't such a good idea. They're disobedient in the introduction, ignoring parents. In the ending, they think, oh, yeah, I really should have listened to mom and dad. Next time, I'm going to listen to mom and dad. In the introduction, they're feeling like a coward and like they can't do anything. And then through the story and in the ending, they learn, hey, we're braver than we think. I'm actually braver than I think, and I'm stronger than I think too. And so, something mentioned in the introduction is wrapped up or dealt with in the conclusion. And that's what gives you that sort of loop and what they call that circular narrative and makes the story feel satisfying and complete. And just as I said just now, I keep saying child, child, child. Let me add this in. It is not directly related to what we were talking about, but it kind of popped up for me this week as well. Sometimes students want to write about characters that are older than they are. And I believe I spoke about this last week or even the week before, but I'm telling you, it kind of comes up more often um, than you would think. And it's not necessarily a huge issue. The trouble is that most students don't know how to write about characters beyond their age because they're mainly writing from experience and the way they would view things, right? And so, in order to really get that clear and to get it um, in their minds and make sure their stories are as effective as possible, advocate writing about characters, main characters in particular, that are the age of the student. Maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, like 1 year, but around the average age. So you want to go with like maybe 9 to 12 age range and make sure the main character fits that kind of age range because students who are going to be doing the exam will be around that age range and they're going to be thinking usually around that age range. It's not as easy as it might seem to put yourself in an older character's point of view. So even when they're writing like parents interacting and so on, they're all writing that from the perspective of the main character and whatever age the main character is. So it's not as if they're putting their minds in the minds of the parents. They would just go on reactions and those kinds of things. So keeping the main character within age is important. And it is something that I think is worth mentioning and mentioning several times just to make sure that that is something that you're working with as well. So let's see what resources do I have that could help you with that? Well, I have the 7 stories challenge. If you don't already have that, you can get that. That is you get 7 sample stories, you get 21 prompts, descriptions, and some guidelines and lots of different things in this one. But of course, you have the stories that you could read. So if you're looking for stories, I do have another booklet that is $50 sample stories. So 3 sample reports and 3 sample stories with a few notes. Because yes, I can't help myself with the notes. But yeah, that one is $50. But in any case, if you want to check in and see what other resources that I have, WhatsApp me 717-4993 and let me know what you're looking for. If it is I don't already have it, I'm going to add it to my list of things that I'm working on and creating because I'm uh creating resources all the time. That's my agenda for this year, just to do as much as possible to churn out as many resources as I can. So between now and the exam, when I say year, I mean like academic year as well. Because I want to make sure I know there's some stuff on the market, but I believe that there are certain gaps in things that, it feels like unless you're a teacher, that's the only way you could know these things. What I'm trying to do is to fill in those details because I know after the teachers do what they do, you as the parent, you need to understand it and reinforce. And then even for teachers, you know what you do, but you want to have resources that you could give the students, worksheets and different things as well. And not all textbooks offer the kinds of worksheets. So that's what I'm trying to fill that gap, to add in certain other kinds of worksheets that would be really helpful to get that critical and creative thinking. And so this is the worksheet that I was telling you about when I spoke about emotions earlier. This one, we're exploring personal reactions, using figurative language with emotions, exploring senses with emotions, thoughts and dialogue with emotions. So it gives the student a sort of broad spectrum of, how they can express and write about emotions. And so if your child or your students are not getting that emotional reactions part done effectively, definitely this is something that you should consider. All right, so we're on the home stretch. This will probably take about maybe 5-10 minutes covering the comprehension, so you have an idea of how much longer we'll be here together. Um, we're looking at responding to poetry. Now, just as a reminder of some of the things that we covered last week, remember poems are shared creative ideas, heavy focus on descriptions, usually 4 to 5 stanzas. And we're looking at interpreting figurative language, recognizing imagery, and reading between the lines, as we say, and then understanding the point of the poem. So, what I thought I'll do this week is go through one of the past papers. Now, I do have this as um, part of the program that I have, well, not program, the worksheets. I have the past papers from 2019 to 2024. Um, 150 for that. You getting, different answers and so on, and with explanation. So I thought I'll take you through some of that. We take a quick look at the 2019 poem. Now, I'm going to share screen, but of course, I'm sharing it with like the two things to the page, so it might be kind of tiny. I do apologize for that, but I just wanted you to see it kind of side by side, so that you could look at. And the reason I'm using the 2019 is because we have a lot more questions. Now, the 2025 format will be a lot closer to the 2024 format. Now, let me show you what the 2019 looks like. Um, right, so I'm going to actually have to share my screen because I'm not going to be able to do. Can I do multiple windows? Nope. So I'll just have to share the entire screen. So yeah, it's kind of tiny. Apologize for that, but the point is really just to show you the answers next to the questions. Can I get this a little bit bigger? Yeah. Yeah, we could probably work it like this. Um, so the questions, now this, we have 10 questions in this one. So the 2019 actually has 10 questions, right? Let me just scroll through them quickly. Give the meaning of each of the following words. Um, from the poem, list 2 tools. Identify one example of each of the figures of speech. What sense does the poet mainly appeal to? Um, explain, why is this an appropriate description? So pretty much explain the meaning of this line. Between the giant and the barber, who is more courageous? So we're talking about characters here. We have mood. How is the mood in stanza 6 different from, well, 5 different from 6? State 1, quality of the barber. So again, character. Why the barber's heart is filled with sorrow. So character, feelings. Again, and if you were the giant, what would you want this barber to cut your hair? Again, character. How does one character feel about another? So out of these 10 questions, there were like four that dealt with characters, right? This one is character, this one is character, um, quality of the character, yeah. Giant and the Barber, who is more courageous, yeah. So, right, so out of the 10 questions, we had four that dealt with characters. So, in the new style of exam, there are 7 questions instead of 10, and two of them at least will be on the characters. So, understanding characters is still very important, and those are, usually the more detailed kind of your own thoughts kind of questions. So, vocabulary. Um, 2 words. Usually, when you go to the line, you have to use the context clues to get the answers, right? Um, so the clues are given in the stanzas where, so this is line 5 and 6. So because it's line 5 and 6, that means they're all in the same stanza, and you could read the stanza and get the gist of the idea of what the stanza is talking about, and use that as part of getting the response. And so we're looking at, specific words that give you an idea of what is happening in the stanza, and that would give you the idea of, coming to the answers. Number 32 tools. These are just straightforward directly in the poem. Um, so you're looking at ideas of stanzas 2 and 3, I think. So you're kind of scanning for details. So that's how you would work with this one. So let's go back up and see. Stanza 2, to begin an undertaking of such a monumental scope, first the barber needs a scaffold. So he needs a scaffold and 1,000 yards of rope. He'll ascend by helicopter to the lofty dome, pair of swords as scissors and pitchforks for comb. So we have many different options between just these two stanzas. And so what gives the idea is the word tools. That's a kind of hint at what the student is looking for, right? Two tools. One example of each of the following figures of speech. So now we're looking at figures of speech, and so the student has to know what's a simile, what's a metaphor. Similes are fairly easy to identify because we're using like or as. So anywhere that has the word like or as, read it carefully to see if we have a comparison. And that's the thing with similes and metaphors. They're both comparisons, right? So if you see the word like, it doesn't automatically mean there's a comparison there or that it's a simile. You have to see the comparison in order to get it done. And then we have what sense is the poet mainly appealed to? Well, we're looking at the poet mainly appeals to sight, and because the actions, imagine. Now you have to give the line. So the line is cleave and slice and hack. I think that is line 14. I don't remember exactly. Let's go back up. Right. He will cleave and slice and hack. So you want to write the line there. And then we have turning forests into wastelands. Why is it appropriate? We give a reason. So, yes, it's appropriate, and we give a reason. And you have to think about making the connections between the ideas to get that answer. Between the giant and the barber, who is more courageous, you have to choose one. Barber is more courageous, and then you give a reason because it says give a reason for your answer using details from the poem. What are the details? What exactly the barber actually had to do? Those are details from the poem. How is the mood? So now we're looking at mood. Um, how is it different? So to answer this kind of question, you have to say the mood in stanza 5 and then the mood in stanza 6. and you're really kind of just putting them back to back using while or whereas, or stanza six is different because you want to show that there's a difference. And just to show the difference, all you're really doing is stating what's in stanza five, and what's in stanza six. Then we have one quality of the barber. What's the quality? He's hardworking. What's the evidence? He labors for weeks and weeks cutting the giant's hair. So we just choose a line from the poem and state the line. Um, then we have explain why the barber's heart is full of sorrow. You give a reason and kind of like a little explanation of that answer. And then finally, um, if I was the giant, what would I do? No, we have a yes or a no. So, yes, I would want the barber to cut my hair because he has all the tools and he's skilled. Yes, I want him to cut my hair because he's really dedicated and he does the job. Or no, I don't want him to cut my hair because he takes way too long. Because as soon as he's finished, he has to start again. Or no, I wouldn't want the barber to cut my hair because he's too small. Why not just use a giant barber and have a giant barber cut with a giant scissors, or barbering machine or whatever? It'll get done a lot faster. So we have lots of different options for these kinds of questions, and usually those are the last questions. And so, if you've been following along with the live, you would have heard me say that the questions kind of build in intensity. And this is an example. You realize that lots of them you get directly from the passage, but this one you have to kind of come up with your own answer. But then that's the last question. And so, students don't necessarily have to be, getting the resources and so on and reading at this point. At this point, they've read the poem at least twice in answering other questions so they have an idea, and then they can go ahead and answer the questions that way. So that was just like a kind of quick run through for you to see what that looks like. And you can see how in the answer sheets that I give, I have the answers separately so that you have the blank paper and you have the answers, and so that you could look at them and therefore focus on the answers and the questions separate, because we are again practicing for the exam. You want to see them side by side like that. And then, of course, in addition to that, so that I could give the explanations and everything right underneath. And the actual paper, I didn't have space to write in all of that. So you get the explanations, as you get proposed answers plus a reasoning why those proposed answers work and where you can find them. And so that was just the 2019. In the 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, I gave a bit more details than this one, so that you could really follow and get the answers and understand the thinking and the rationale behind giving the answers as they were. So that is our lineup for today. And we have the reports, in which case you're dealing with incidents. We have the narratives, in which case you're dealing with the endings. And then we have the comprehension, which you're looking at the poetry. And so for this week with the comprehension, what you're working on is um, reading and discussing poems, which you should be doing every week. Study the way questions are asked and answered, and then you want to complete a poetry comprehension. And for those of you who are looking for the answers, like the ones I just read, 150 for the 2019 to 2024, you get the whole 2019, not just the poem. And then I have my own these, and I'm also working on another set. I keep saying that every week so that I could hold myself accountable. I need to get this done. I'm going to be spending my holiday working on comprehension. to make sure I get it done. Right? But so you have these options, and for the I do give answers for these as well. Same kind of answers with this is what the answer is that I suggest, and this is why I suggest this answer, and those types of things. So it's really comprehensive. All right. So, and just like that, we are 1 hour and 5 minutes past and counting, and at the end of episode 24. Yep. And so thank you so much for those of you who were able to like stick it out for the hour and extra. And I hope you gained a lot. If you still have questions, message me, WhatsApp. Um, the comments. Find me on Facebook, Wood Coach Youth. You could look for my name, Shelly Ann Edwards Barron, on Facebook. Message me as well. I'm also in SEA Peaceful Approach, so you can ask questions there. Lots of different ways to reach me, and I'm here to help. So ask your questions. If I can't answer it directly, which I will definitely try to do, I will address the question as part of the live that I'm doing. So thank you again for your time. And if you're looking at the recording, I appreciate you. If you stuck it out through the live, I appreciate you more than I can say. So I enjoy the rest of the day. And I shall see you next week for more Journey to SEA 2025. Bye bye.